Have you ever seen a dog speak without saying a word? Not with barks, but with eyes that tell a truth no human dared to face. This isn't just a story about a police dog. It's about what happens when loyalty outshines fear, when a German shepherd walks into a courtroom and changes everything. Because sometimes, courage doesn't come from the loudest voices. It comes from the quiet bond between a child who couldn't speak and the dog who refused to stay silent. I've spent years studying real stories like this, moments where animals stepped in when people couldn't, and somehow reminded us what love, trust, and justice really mean. And today, I want to share one that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Stay with me for the next few minutes. You'll see how a loyal Keitan turned heartbreak into hope, and why the connection between humans and dogs might just be the most powerful force on Earth. Because this isn't just about a police dog's loyalty. It's about the kind of love that speaks when words fail, and how sometimes that's enough to change a life forever. The morning light slipped through the tall windows of the courtroom, pale and cold, like it had lost its warmth somewhere along the way. It painted thin stripes across the polished wooden benches, the marble floors, and the rows of faces waiting in silence. Dust motes drifted in the air, tiny fragments suspended in time, as if even they were afraid to move. Every sound in the room echoed with an edge, the click of shoes on stone, the shuffle of paper, the dry cough of a spectator. And then there was the voice, sharp, male. The defense attorney's tone sliced through the stillness like a blade. "Tell us again," he said, pacing slowly before the witness stand. "What exactly happened that night?" At the edge of the stand sat a little girl, barely 7 years old. Her feet dangled above the floor, too small to reach the step. She wore a pale blue dress, wrinkled from the nervous grip of her own hands. Every time the man's voice rose, her shoulders flinched as though struck. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her gaze stayed fixed on the wooden surface before her, where her trembling fingers kept tracing invisible shapes, circles, lines, anything to keep her mind away from the questions. The jury watched in uneasy silence. The air inside that room seemed to thicken with every passing second, pressing down on everyone's chest. The little girl opened her mouth to answer, but only a faint whisper came out. I don't remember," she said. The defense attorney sighed dramatically and turned toward the jury. "You see? Inconsistent. Convenient memory loss." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Cameras from the press clicked once, twice, flashes quickly followed by a warning look from the bailiff. From the second row, Detective Harris sat rigid, his hands clenched tightly on his knees. He had been through hundreds of cases, armed robberies, kidnappings, even murders, but nothing had ever felt as suffocating as this. Not this little girl. Not today. He remembered the night they found her. Alone. Half-starved. Hiding. She hadn't spoken a word for 2 days, but she'd looked at him with those same wide eyes, full of terror and confusion. And in that moment, he'd promised himself she would never hurt again. And yet, here she was, being hurt all over. Not by fists, not by cruelty, but by words. Beside him, Rex, his German shepherd K9, lay quietly at attention. The dog's coat gleamed even in the dull light, his muscles taut beneath the fur. He didn't move, didn't bark, didn't fidget, but his golden brown eyes were locked on the child. He watched her every breath, every flinch, every tiny shift of emotion. Rex tilted his head slightly when her voice cracked, letting out the faintest exhale through his nose, a sound no one noticed except the detective. Harris placed a hand on Rex's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. "Easy, boy," he whispered under his breath. But it wasn't Rex he was calming. It was himself. The defense lawyer leaned closer to the girl now, his voice deceptively soft. "You said your mother told you to stay quiet that night. Why would she say that?" The girl blinked rapidly, her lips trembling. I don't know. Did she ever hurt you? Did anyone in your house ever hit you?" The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor," badgering the witness. "Sustained," the judge replied, his gravelly voice echoing from the high bench. "Counselor, tone it down. She's 7. But the damage was done. The girl's eyes had glazed with tears she couldn't hold back. She sniffled once, then tried to straighten her posture, trying so hard to be brave, like someone had told her to before. Harris's heart twisted painfully. He'd seen hardened criminals show less fear under cross-examination than this child. The judge gave the girl a small nod. "Take your time, sweetheart," he said gently. But she barely heard him. Her small hand had started to twist the hem of her dress again, the fabric now crumpled and damp with sweat. Rex lifted his head slightly, ears pricking. His body went from calm to alert, but not aggressive. He was reading her, sensing the spike in her heart rate, the trembling of her breath. He let out a low rumble in his throat, not a growl of warning, more like a quiet, protective murmur. The kind only a handler would understand. The detective's hand tightened around Rex's collar. "I know, buddy," he whispered. "She's scared." The girl's eyes flickered toward the sound. When she saw the familiar shape of the German shepherd watching her, something changed. For a moment, her shoulders dropped, and she took a shaky breath. Rex's gaze was steady, kind, not demanding anything, not asking questions. Just there. It was enough to anchor her. Can I hold my teddy bear?" she asked suddenly, her voice small. The courtroom went silent. The defense frowned, ready to object again, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her." A female officer hurried to bring the worn, one-eyed teddy bear she'd clutched during earlier hearings. The child hugged it tightly to her chest, as if its threadbare body could shield her from the questions. The lawyer tried to resume, but his words now sounded hollow. The jury no longer looked at him. They looked at her. At the way she shook. At the way she clung to the stuffed animal like it was the only thing keeping her whole. Rex's tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, brushing lightly against the detective's boot. Harris looked down at him and felt something rise in his chest, a quiet fire of anger, helplessness, and resolve. He'd seen Rex face armed suspects without hesitation. But this moment, this silent connection between the child and the dog, was something sacred, something deeper than duty. The questioning dragged on for what felt like an eternity. By the time the judge called for a brief recess, the little girl's voice was almost gone. "Thank you, miss," he said softly. "You may step down." She nodded without speaking, her tiny fingers still gripping the teddy bear. As she slid off the chair, one of her shoes made a small squeak on the polished floor, an innocent sound swallowed by the weight of the room. The court clerk guided her back toward her seat, but before she reached it, she turned her head slightly toward Rex. Her lips trembled in something like a half-smile. Rex lowered his head, as if bowing to her in silent understanding. And then, silence. Utter, crushing silence. The detective felt the air leave his lungs as she sat down, shoulders curled inward, tears finally spilling over and landing in small, perfect drops on the wooden surface of the stand. Each tear shone under the cold sunlight, tiny mirrors reflecting pain, fear, and something even deeper, the longing to be heard. Rex let out one quiet breath, and for the first time that morning, the detective realized it wasn't the child who was breaking. It was everyone else. The storm had come without warning that night. One of those cold, relentless downpours that swallowed the city whole. Rain drummed against rooftops, flooding gutters, turning alleys into shallow rivers of gray water and mud. The neon signs flickered through the sheets of rain, colors bleeding together until the streets looked like a dream slowly being washed away. Detective Harris gripped the steering wheel as thunder rolled above him. The call had come in an hour earlier, possible child seen wandering behind the old railway market. No one had answered follow-up calls. The patrol units were stretched thin that night, so he'd gone himself, with Rex sitting silently in the passenger seat. "Let's check the south lot first," he muttered softly. Not sure why he was speaking out loud. Maybe it was to fill the silence. Maybe it was to remind himself that somewhere in that rain-soaked darkness, a child was alone. Rex shifted, pressing his nose to the fogged window, ears perked. The German shepherd's eyes tracked something invisible, his instincts sharp, every movement alert. The wipers groaned back and forth, fighting a losing battle. Then Harris saw it. A narrow alley between two abandoned warehouses, dimly lit by the reflection of a broken streetlight. The kind of place people didn't go unless they had nowhere else to be. He stopped the car, opened the door, and the storm immediately roared in. The cold slapped his face as he shouted over the rain, "Rex, search!" The dog leapt out, paws splashing into puddles, nose low to the ground. Harris followed, his flashlight cutting thin beams through the darkness. The smell of wet trash and rust filled the air. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "Where are you?" Then Rex froze. His head lifted, ears forward, tail stiff. He turned sharply toward a stack of dumpsters against the far wall. The detective's light followed him, landing on something small, a flicker of motion behind the bins. "Hey," Harris called gently, lowering his voice. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." No answer. Only the sound of rain pounding on metal. He stepped closer, boots splashing in the puddles, heart thudding. Rex stayed a step ahead, his tail lowering, body soft. A trained canine reading fear, not threat. "Time up 700 bomb." As Harris rounded the last dumpster, his light fell on a tiny figure huddled in the corner, shivering violently. A little girl, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped tightly around a tattered teddy bear whose missing eye glistened under the beam. She flinched at the light, shrinking further into herself. Her bare feet were blue from the cold. "Hey." Harris crouched, lowering the flashlight so it wouldn't blind her. "You're okay." "I'm with the police." Her lips moved, but the words came out as a whimper lost in the rain. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, setting the flashlight down so his hands were visible. "See? Empty hands. You're safe." Rex took a cautious step forward, tail low, ears back, his whole body radiating calm. The little girl's eyes darted toward him, wide and frightened. "It's all right," Harris murmured. "He's a good boy. His name's Rex." The German shepherd lowered himself to the wet ground, crawling forward slowly until his nose was just a few inches from the child's hand. Then, with the gentlest movement, he nudged her wrist with his snout. The girl froze, Then, almost imperceptibly, she reached out, one trembling hand resting on the dog's head. Her fingers sank into the wet fur, and something in her posture changed. The tension eased, just enough for her to breathe. "That's it," Harris whispered. "He likes you." For a long moment, none of them moved. The storm raged around them. But inside that narrow alley, it was as if time itself had slowed. A fragile pocket of silence, where a child's first thread of trust was being sewn back together. When she finally spoke, her voice was paper-thin. "I lost my mom." Harris felt something twist deep in his chest. He knew what that sentence meant. The fear behind it, the questions it carried. "We'll find her," he promised softly. "But first, we need to get you warm." He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. It swallowed her whole, but she clutched it tightly like a shield. "Come on, sweetheart," he said gently, extending his hand. She hesitated, looking between his face and the dog. Rex gave a soft whine and nudged her again. And finally, she placed her cold hand into Harris's palm. That simple touch felt heavier than any oath he'd ever sworn. He led her back to the car, Rex walking beside her like a silent guardian. The rain drummed against the roof as he turned on the heater, but she still shivered. Her eyes followed every move he made, cautious, watchful. Trauma had taught her that adults were unpredictable. Harris reached into the glove compartment and handed her a folded blanket. "Here," he said. "It's clean." She took it wordlessly, pulling it close. After a few minutes, her eyes began to droop, exhaustion finally overpowering fear. She fell asleep curled up in the seat, still holding her teddy bear. Rex rested his head near her feet, his ears flicking at every sound outside, but his body relaxed only when she did. Harris drove in silence, the rhythmic hum of the tires blending with the rain. The flashing lights from the city danced across her sleeping face, soft, fleeting streaks of color, and in that quiet, he whispered the words that would haunt him later. "I promise, little one, no one will hurt you again." He didn't know then how fragile that promise would become. He didn't know that months later, in that same courtroom drenched in sunlight and fear, she would be forced to relive everything she'd tried to forget. He only knew that in this moment, with Rex at his side and the child asleep in his jacket, the world felt, for once, worth saving. Months later, sitting in the courtroom, Harris's mind returned to that night again and again. The rain, the teddy bear, her trembling hand on Rex's fur. He looked across the courtroom now, and there she was, that same small girl, sitting in a chair too large for her, clutching the same bear. The blue ribbon around its neck was frayed, her shoulders smaller somehow, her eyes older. And Harris felt the weight of every unspoken word, every broken system that had led her here. Rex lay beside him, watching her, just as he had that night in the alley. "I promised her," Harris murmured under his breath. "I promised she'd be safe." Rex's ear flicked toward him, as if he understood. The detective swallowed hard. The rain had stopped long ago, but somehow, inside his chest, the storm was still raging. The gavel struck once, sharp and commanding, as the courtroom came back to order. "Court is now in session," the judge's deep voice echoed, filling every corner of the chamber. The murmurs of the audience faded. The air was dense with tension, heavy, unmoving, like everyone was holding their breath. At the witness stand sat the little girl, the same child who had spent the last recess sitting silently, her small hands folded over her teddy bear. The court clerk leaned forward and adjusted the microphone toward her. But even the soft scrape of metal against wood made her flinch. Her eyes darted toward the front row, where Detective Harris sat beside his K-9 partner Rex. The sight of them steadied her a little. The detective's quiet nod, the dog's calm, unwavering gaze. It reminded her that not everyone in this room was here to hurt her. Still, as the defense attorney stood, she froze. His footsteps echoed like hammers against the marble floor. He straightened his tie, flashed the jury a practiced smile, and turned toward the child. "Miss," he began smoothly, "you understand that it's important to tell the truth today, correct?" The girl nodded weakly. "And that no one has told you what to say?" She shook her head. Her voice came out small and tremulous. "No, sir." "Good," he said, pacing slowly. "Now, let's talk about your home." The courtroom seemed to contract. The temperature didn't change, but everyone felt the chill. "What was your home like?" he asked casually, as if asking about a favorite toy. "Your parents. They took care of you, didn't they?" The girl blinked, her mouth opening, closing again. She stared at her lap, fingers digging into the fabric of her dress. I guess," she murmured. "You guess," the lawyer repeated, pretending to smile. "Did they make sure you had food, a warm bed, toys to play with?" Each question hit like a stone tossed into a fragile pond. Her lips trembled. "Sometimes." "Sometimes," he echoed, turning toward the jury with a theatrical sigh. "Children often exaggerate, don't they? Memory can be tricky at that age." "Objection," the prosecutor snapped, standing. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge said. "Stick to the questions, counselor." The defense lawyer nodded, but the smirk never left his face. "Of course, Your Honor." He turned back to the girl, his tone now honey-sweet and sharp beneath the surface. "You mentioned before that you fell down the stairs once, correct?" The girl hesitated. "Yes." "And that's how you got that bruise on your arm?" Her small hands went to her sleeves, as if to hide the mark that was no longer there. Her voice broke. "I think so." "You think so?" he repeated, pouncing. "So you're not sure? Could it have been from playing? Maybe from being careless?" "I don't know," she whispered. The lawyer tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Your father, he disciplined you, didn't he?" "Objection!" the prosecutor said again, louder this time. But the girl had already started shaking. The judge's voice blurred into the background as her breaths came faster, shorter. She could hear the rain again. The storm that lived only in her memory, pounding against glass, footsteps, shouting, the crash of something breaking. "Miss," the lawyer pressed, leaning forward. "Did he ever hit you?" Her voice cracked. He said I was bad." Rex's ears shot up. A low rumble built in his throat, barely audible, but Detective Harris felt it before he heard it. The dog's entire body stiffened. His nostrils flared, as if catching a scent in the air. Not of danger, but of pain. Harris placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Easy," he whispered under his breath, though his own pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to stand up, to shout, to drag that man away from the witness stand. But he couldn't. The law didn't allow him to protect her like that. Not here. Not now. The lawyer continued mercilessly. "Did your mother ever tell you not to talk about what happened at home?" The girl's eyes darted toward the floor. Her lip quivered. She said, "People wouldn't understand." A hush fell over the room. The lawyer's expression faltered for the first time. But instead of stopping, he pressed further. desperate to regain control. And yet here you are, talking about it anyway. Why? Tears welled up, spilling over her lashes. Because I want it to stop. The words were barely a whisper, but they struck like thunder. In the stillness that followed, Rex shifted again, letting out a soft whine, low, aching. His body was coiled like a spring, torn between obedience and instinct. He could sense her distress in every breath, every trembling muscle. The judge leaned forward. "Counselor, I think that's enough." But the lawyer ignored him. "Miss, are you sure someone didn't put those words in your mouth? Maybe the detective?" That was the breaking point. The girl gasped, pressing her hands to her ears. "Stop!" she cried, her voice shattering into a sob. "Please stop!" The courtroom erupted. The prosecutor shouted. The judge slammed his gavel. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing. And Rex rose to his feet. His tail was down, his body trembling. A deep growl rolled from his chest, not directed at anyone in particular, but at the tension itself, as if the dog were warning the world to back away from her pain. Harris wrapped his arm around the dog's neck, holding him back, whispering, "It's okay, boy. I know." But his own eyes burned. He couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of that promise. No one will hurt you again, crumbling in real time. The judge's voice thundered above the chaos. "Enough! This court will recess for 15 minutes!" The gavel struck again, and the sound cracked through the silence like lightning splitting the sky. The bailiff hurried to escort the girl away, but before she stepped down, she looked toward Harris and Rex. Her face was streaked with tears, but in her gaze was something heartbreaking. Not anger, not fear, but betrayal. Harris swallowed hard. She had believed in him. She had believed in the safety he'd promised. And here she was, breaking in front of a room full of strangers while he sat powerless, watching. As the door closed behind her, the detective sank back into his seat, running a hand through his hair. Rex sat at his feet, eyes still fixed on the door where she had disappeared. The courtroom was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the stillness that follows a storm, the kind that leaves everything drenched and broken. Harris exhaled slowly. "We're losing her," he whispered. Rex turned his head toward him, ears twitching. His gaze was fierce, as if to say, "Not yet." The detective looked at his partner and nodded once, the faintest spark of resolve igniting behind his exhaustion. The law had tied his hands, but Rex somehow always found a way. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, sealing off the chaos of the courtroom. The sound of the gavel, the murmurs, the flashes of cameras, all faded into a muffled hum beyond the wood. Inside this small waiting room, silence hung thick, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint rattle of the air vent. The little girl sat on the edge of a worn leather couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, her small hands gripping the same teddy bear that had followed her through every hearing. Her cheeks were still damp, eyes swollen and red. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. Detective Harris stood by the door for a long moment, his back against the wall, his mind racing, but his heart aching more than anything else. He'd seen victims before, seen pain take 1,000 different shapes, but this quiet collapse of a child's spirit, was something he'd never learned how to bear. He took a deep breath, removed his jacket, and knelt down in front of her. The floor was cold under his knee. "Hey," he said softly, "you did really well out there." She didn't respond. Her tiny fingers twisted the teddy's ear over and over. "It's okay to be scared," he whispered. "You're not in trouble. Nobody here's angry with you." Her lips quivered. He said I lied." Harris's chest tightened. He reached forward but stopped short of touching her. "He was wrong," he said firmly. "You didn't lie. Sometimes bad people say things to make us doubt what we know. But I believe you. And so does Rex." At the sound of his name, the German shepherd moved from where he'd been lying quietly near the door. Without a sound, Rex padded over and settled beside the couch. He lowered his head slowly, resting it on the girl's lap. For a second, she froze. Then, as if guided by instinct, she reached out and ran her fingers through his fur. Her small hand trembled at first, then steadied. The warmth of his body, the softness of his fur, seemed to melt the ice that fear had built around her heart. Rex stayed perfectly still, his breathing deep and even, his tail barely twitching. "He likes you," Harris murmured with a faint smile. The girl nodded weakly. He's warm." "Yeah, the detective said quietly. "He's good at that." For a few minutes, the room was calm. The girl leaned against Rex's neck, her breathing slowing, the tightness in her shoulders easing a little. Harris sat back on his heels, just watching. He knew enough about trauma to understand that these moments of stillness, were more healing than 100 words could ever be. But peace never lasted long in his world. A knock sounded at the door. An officer leaned in and handed Harris a folder. "Detective, you might want to see this. From the evidence clerk." Harris nodded and took it. "Thanks." When the door closed again, he set the folder on the table. The name of the case stared back at him in black ink. He flipped it open, page after page of reports, witness statements, evidence logs. Everything was there, except one thing: the phone. He frowned, scanning the inventory list again. The device her parents had claimed was lost. The same one mentioned in early interviews, but never submitted. According to this record, it had never even been logged into evidence custody. He leaned back, his brow furrowing. That wasn't just an oversight. Evidence didn't just vanish. Not in a case like this. He looked up. The girl was still stroking Rex's fur, lost in thought. Her lips moved like she was whispering something to the dog. Secrets too heavy for adults to carry. "Hey," Harris said softly, careful not to startle her. "Do you remember a phone in your house? Maybe your mom's or your dad's?" She hesitated, her small fingers pausing mid-motion. "Daddy's phone." "What color was it?" "Black, with a crack on the back." Her eyes flicked toward him briefly. "He used to take pictures, sometimes videos." A shiver went through Harris. "Do you know what happened to it?" "He put it in the box," she said, voice so faint he had to lean closer. "The one under the stairs. Mommy said it was broken." A pause. Then she added, "But it wasn't." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Harris's heartbeat picked up. The box under the stairs. That area had been searched, but not thoroughly. Not after the parents' statement redirected the focus elsewhere. He turned toward Rex, who was still pressed against the child, eyes half closed in calm alertness. The detective's mind was already racing ahead, connecting threads. A hidden phone. Missing evidence. The girl's fear every time that object was mentioned. Something didn't fit, and Rex could sense it too. The dog's ears twitched suddenly. He lifted his head from the girl's lap, nostrils flaring. His attention shifted toward the door, then back to Harris, tail giving one slow sweep against the floor. "You feel it too, huh?" Harris muttered under his breath. Rex tilted his head as if answering. Harris rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion pulling at the edges of his voice. "You've found things no one else could before," he said quietly. "Guess we're gonna need that nose again." The girl watched them, eyes wide but calmer now. "Is he going to help again?" Harris smiled faintly. "Yeah, sweetheart, he always helps." She looked down at Rex, who had settled his chin back on her lap. "He makes the bad things stop," she whispered. Harris's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her that wasn't how the world worked. That sometimes, no matter how hard they fought, bad things slipped through cracks in the system, disguised as procedure or law. But he couldn't bring himself to break that fragile hope she held. So instead, he said, "He'll try. We both will." The girl leaned down and pressed her forehead gently against Rex's. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. The dog's eyes closed, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the whole room exhaled with her. Harris stood slowly, tucking the folder under his arm. He glanced once more at the evidence list, then toward the closed door that led back to the courtroom. Outside, justice was measured in arguments and rules. But in here, in this quiet space where a broken child found comfort in a dog's heartbeat, it was something simpler, something purer. He reached down and patted Rex's shoulder. "Come on, partner. Looks like we've got one more thing to find." Rex rose to his feet, gave the girl's hand a final nudge, and turned toward the door. "Ready." Harris looked back at the girl, her small frame dwarfed by the couch, her teddy bear clutched close again. For the first time since the trial began, her breathing was steady. The detective offered her a small nod. "We'll make it right," he said quietly. And though she didn't answer, her eyes, glistening, fragile, yet filled with trust, were enough of a promise to bind them both. The courtroom was silent again when the session resumed. But it wasn't the calm of peace. It was the fragile quiet that comes before a storm. The judge adjusted his glasses, shuffled a few papers, and nodded for the defense to continue. The girl was back on the stand. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller than before, like the wooden chair might swallow her whole. Detective Harris sat at the side, every muscle in his body drawn taut. The recess had done little to calm him. He could still hear her sobs from the small waiting room, still see Rex's head resting gently on her knees. And now she was back under the same cold lights, the same questions waiting like knives. The defense attorney rose, his tone cool, deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, "I'd like to continue questioning the witness." The judge nodded once. "Proceed, but keep it brief." The lawyer paced in front of the jury, turning the air heavy with every calculated word. "Now, miss," he said, "earlier you said your father yelled at you. But yelling, that's not the same as abuse, is it?" The girl's lips trembled. He scared me." "Scared you?" the man repeated, feigning confusion. "Or disciplined you?" "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "Sustained," said the judge, but the damage was already done. The question lingered like smoke, stinging long after it was silenced. The child's breathing grew shallow again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the seat until her knuckles turned white. At the defense table, the girl's parents sat stone-faced. Her mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but her father's stare was cold, unwavering. Harris's jaw clenched. He'd seen that look before, the kind that made children shrink into silence. The lawyer shifted gears, his voice now dripping with feigned sympathy. "Miss," he said, "you've been through a lot. Sometimes when people ask us questions over and over, we start to remember things that didn't really happen." Could it be, he continued smoothly, that someone told you these stories about your father? The girl blinked rapidly. No, no, he pressed. Are you sure? Her eyes darted toward Thunt, the detective, a silent plea. She wasn't looking for words, only for something solid to hold on to in this storm of adults. And then, it happened. A low, rumbling sound broke the silence. Rex. The German shepherd had been lying at Harris's feet, motionless since the session began. But now his head was up, ears perked, eyes alert. He sniffed the air once, then again, his body tense but controlled. Rex? Harris whispered, leaning slightly toward him. The dog didn't respond. His gaze had shifted toward the evidence table near the front of the courtroom, the one stacked with case files, envelopes, and sealed bags. Then came the growl, low, steady, vibrating through the floor. The judge glanced over, eyebrows knitting together. Detective, control your animal. But Harris wasn't sure he could. Something in Rex's demeanor was different. Not defensive, not aggressive. Purposeful. Easy, boy, he said under his breath. But Rex was already moving. Without waiting for a command, the dog stood, tail low, body rigid. His paws clicked against the polished floor as he moved down the aisle. The entire courtroom froze. Detective, the judge barked. Restrain him. Rex, heel, Harris ordered, rising quickly. But Rex didn't stop. His nose twitched furiously, nostrils flaring as if tracking a scent invisible to everyone else. He passed the jury box, ignoring the startled gasps. He reached the evidence table and began sniffing around it, circling once, then twice. The bailiff stepped forward. Detective, get your dog. But before anyone could reach him, Rex made a sudden, decisive move. With one powerful motion, he pawed aside a pile of folders, scattering papers across the table. The room erupted in startled murmurs. What on earth? The defense lawyer started, but stopped short when Rex dipped his head beneath the stack of documents and began pulling something out. The sound of scraping filled the air, metal against wood, and then, from beneath a heap of old files, Rex dragged out a small, dust-covered object wrapped in gray cloth. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The judge leaned forward. What is that? Rex dropped it onto the floor with a soft thud, then stepped back, sitting squarely, as if waiting for approval. Harris was already moving. He crouched beside the dog and carefully picked up the object. When he unwrapped it, his breath caught in his throat. A smartphone, cracked, dusty, the back chipped near the camera lens, exactly as the girl had described. The missing device. Oh my God, Harris muttered. Your Honor, the defense lawyer barked, red-faced. This is highly irregular. That dog is not evidence. He has no place interfering with court proceedings. Order, shouted the judge, slamming his gavel. Order in this courtroom. The room erupted with voices, reporters whispering, jurors leaning forward, spectators gasping. The girl on the stand looked bewildered, clutching her teddy bear tighter. Harris rose slowly, holding the phone in his hand like something fragile and sacred. He turned it over. The same cracked edge, the same faded brand marking. He remembered the interview reports, the word lost, scribbled in the notes. He remembered the box under the stairs the girl had mentioned. Somehow, somewhere, this phone had made its way here, hidden among files meant to be public, forgotten, or worse, concealed. Detective Harris, the judge said sharply, is this the missing evidence referenced in the initial case file? Yes, Your Honor, Harris replied, his voice steady though his pulse was racing. This matches the description of the phone we were told was never recovered. The defense lawyer threw up his hands. This is absurd. That phone could be anything. There's no chain of custody, no verification. Sit down, counselor. The judge cut him off, eyes narrowing. We will determine that soon enough. Rex stood beside Harris, tail still, eyes alert, his entire posture radiating calm certainty, as if he knew exactly what he'd done. The little girl's voice broke through the murmur of the crowd. That's Daddy's phone. Every head turned toward her. Her small voice trembled but was clear, undeniable. The judge looked at Harris. Detective, hand it to the bailiff for inspection. We'll have the tech unit verify the data. Harris nodded and approached the bench, handing over the phone carefully. The bailiff took it as though it might burn him. Behind him, the defense lawyer whispered something heated to his clients. The father's face turned ashen, his jaw tight, eyes darting between the detective and the evidence table. Harris noticed. So did Rex. The dog's eyes locked onto the man's movement, a quiet, instinctive focus. The judge struck his gavel once more. Until this matter is reviewed, court will stand in recess. The tension burst into murmurs again as people began to stand, whispering, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Harris knelt beside Rex and scratched the dog gently behind the ear. You did it again, partner, he murmured. Rex leaned his head against his knee, tail thumping once. Quiet, certain, proud. Across the room, the girl was watching them, her eyes wide, not with fear this time, but with the fragile light of hope. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff stepped forward, holding the cracked phone carefully in both hands like it might shatter under its own weight. Every eye followed him. The hum of whispers had died. Even the sound of shifting feet seemed loud against the sudden hush. Judge Calloway's voice cut through the stillness. Our technical team has confirmed that this phone's serial number matches the one reported missing from the initial investigation. It was registered as belonging to the defendant. A ripple of murmurs swept the gallery. The defense lawyer leapt to his feet. Your Honor, I must object to this. The judge raised a hand sharply. Sit down, counselor. You'll have your say after we've reviewed the material. The lawyer's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. On the stand, the little girl sat frozen, clutching her teddy bear against her chest. Her small fingers dug into the fabric so hard that the stitches strained. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that the room had changed. Adults were looking at her again, but differently now. Not as if she were confused, but as if her trembling voice had carried truth all along. Detective Harris sat 2 rows behind, one hand resting on Rex's shoulder. He could feel the tension running through the dog's muscles, the quiet readiness, the unspoken awareness that something important was about to unfold. The bailiff placed the phone on the table before the judge, who nodded to the technician seated nearby. You may begin. A large monitor flickered to life at the front of the room. The light from it cast a pale glow across the wooden benches, catching the faces of everyone present. The little girl's eyes widened. She gripped the bear tighter, a soft squeak escaping from the worn fabric. The video started with static, a distorted hum of sound and flickering light. Then the image steadied. A living room appeared, dimly lit, cluttered, the wallpaper stained with age. A television flickered in the corner, its glow casting harsh shadows across the walls. Toys were scattered across the floor, one of them the same teddy bear the girl now held. The sound came next, muffled at first, then sharp, jagged. Didn't I tell you to clean this up? A man's voice thundered. A smaller voice answered, high-pitched, uncertain. I tried. You tried? The voice grew louder. The camera jolted as if someone had grabbed the phone. You're useless! Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the jury box covered their mouth. The defense lawyer started to rise, but the judge's glare stopped him cold. The video continued. The man's shadow moved closer. The girl's sobs audible now. The kind of crying that came from deep inside. The kind that carried fear, not tantrum. Then it happened. A sudden movement. A hand appearing in the frame. A shove. The child stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a table. The sound of her cry cut through the speakers like glass shattering. The courtroom froze. The only movement came from the flickering light of the screen. Harris's jaw locked. He'd seen plenty of evidence in his career. Security footage, crime scene photos, interrogations. But nothing like this. This wasn't just proof. This was the very moment innocence had been broken. Recorded by the abuser's own arrogance. The little girl had gone completely still on the stand. She didn't blink. Her knuckles had turned white around the teddy bear. On the defense side, the father's face was pale, his jaw clenched tight enough to tremble. The mother stared down at her lap, her eyes glassy, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Your Honor," the defense lawyer said again, voice shaky now. "This footage is prejudicial. We can't confirm the authenticity." "Silence," Judge Calloway said, his tone like a knife through steel. "This court will not interrupt the evidence." The video continued. The man's voice in the recording lowered, dripping with venom. "You tell anyone about this, and I'll make sure they take you away. You hear me?" A sniffle, a muffled yes. Then the camera shifted, falling to the floor. The final image showed the girl's small frame crouched in the corner, hugging her knees. The screen froze there. No one breathed. The silence was unbearable, heavy, suffocating. The girl's quiet sobs filled the void like a fragile thread of truth, unspooling after being trapped too long. Detective Harris rose slowly, not to speak, but to look. At the judge, at the jury, at the child who had carried the weight of this for months. His throat ached. He placed his hand on Rex's neck again, feeling the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing. Rex, too, was watching. His gaze fixed on the girl, his ears tilted forward. He took one step closer, and the faint click of his claws on the tile echoed louder than the murmurs of the room. The little girl blinked, breaking from her frozen trance. She looked down, and there he was, the same dog who had found her in the rain, who had sat with her through every hearing, who had now uncovered the proof no human could. Her trembling hand reached out, fingers brushing the soft fur between his ears. It was as if the courtroom itself held its breath. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not the silent, hopeless tears from before, but the kind that came when truth finally found its voice. She leaned forward, pressing her palm fully against Rex's head, holding on as though he were the only thing anchoring her to this moment. The dog didn't move. His eyes softened. His tail gave one slow thump, a wordless assurance that she was safe now, that the darkness had been seen. The judge cleared his throat, his voice quieter than before. "This court acknowledges the recording as admissible evidence. The truth, it seems, has a way of surfacing, sometimes by unexpected means." Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor's eyes glistened. Even some of the jurors looked shaken, their gazes flicking toward the little girl with newfound respect or remorse for ever doubting her. As the lights brightened again, the father slumped in his seat, his lawyer's frantic whispers bouncing off walls no one could hear anymore. The case had just shifted, not because of argument, not because of strategy, but because one German shepherd refused to ignore what humans had overlooked. Rex sat beside the girl's chair, posture straight, eyes calm. The silent guardian who had dragged the truth back into the light. And as the bailiff moved to turn off the monitor, the final frame of the paused video still glowed faintly. The image of a child alone, crying. A wound the world had finally been forced to see. The girl's hand remained on Rex's fur, her tears dripping down onto his coat. He didn't flinch. He only stayed close, steady as the earth beneath her. And for the first time since the trial began, she let herself breathe. Truth had broken open the silence, and in that moment, justice no longer felt like an idea. It felt alive. For a long moment after the video ended, no one spoke. The courtroom seemed suspended between two heartbeats, caught somewhere between disbelief and shame. The air itself felt heavier, pressing down on every chest in the room. The little girl sat frozen on the stand, staring blankly at the now dark screen. Her small hands were still tangled in Rex's fur, her knuckles white. She looked like she was somewhere else, lost again in that flickering world of memory the video had dragged her back into. Judge Calloway broke the silence. His voice, usually stern and commanding, was softer now, almost gentle. "Miss," he said, leaning forward slightly, "you've been very brave today. But before we continue, I need to ask, do you want to say something?" The question hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward the girl. The prosecutors, the defense, the jury, the journalists with their pens poised mid-sentence. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim, waiting. The child's lips parted, but no sound came. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room, to the rows of faces staring, to the judge's kind but expectant gaze, and finally, to the one place that never frightened her. Rex. The German shepherd sat beside her chair, completely still, his gaze steady and calm. When her breath hitched, he tilted his head, ears flicking forward, as if urging her, "You're not alone." Her lower lip quivered. Slowly, she slipped off the chair and knelt beside him on the floor, her small hand clutching his collar for balance. The courtroom gasped, but the judge didn't stop her. She leaned close, her voice barely a whisper, trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. "You found it, didn't you?" Rex blinked, slow and certain. His tail thumped once against the floor. The girl's shoulders trembled. "You made them see," she whispered again. And this time her words weren't just for him. They were for herself. A quiet realization that the truth she'd carried alone was no longer invisible. She took a deep breath. When she lifted her head, the entire room seemed to draw back, as if sensing something sacred was about to happen. Time 600 storm. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes red-rimmed, but behind that fear flickered something else, something steady. "I want to talk," she said softly. The judge nodded once, his voice nearly cracking. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Take your time." Her fingers stayed tangled in Rex's fur. She looked at him once more, then turned toward the courtroom. Her voice came out small, shaking, but clear enough for every microphone and every heart in the room to hear. "He used to tell me not to cry," she began. "He said crying made me weak, but I wasn't weak, I was just little." Her words fell heavy like drops of rain on still water. "He would get angry," she continued, "sometimes for no reason. Sometimes because I spilled something or forgot to clean up. He'd yell. Then he'd hit the wall. And sometimes—" She paused, her throat tightening. "Sometimes He hit me instead." No one moved. Her small voice wavered, but she kept going. "At night, I'd hide in my room with my teddy. Mommy would say it was just because Daddy was tired, but he wasn't. He was mad. And when he was mad, he said things that made me feel like I wasn't real." She wiped her nose on her sleeve, sniffling. Rex pressed his head gently against her arm, grounding her. "I remember the day he broke the phone," she said suddenly. "He was yelling at Mommy. She tried to stop him from shouting at me, and he threw it at the wall. I picked it up later, when he left. It still worked. I didn't mean to record, but it happened." Her breathing grew shallow again. "He saw me holding it, and he got so angry. He said if I told anyone, they'd take me away. That no one would believe a kid." Across the room, the defense lawyer stared at the floor, his hands gripping the edge of his table. Even he couldn't meet her eyes. The girl's voice grew quieter. "After that, I stopped talking. I thought, if I stayed quiet, maybe it would stop, but it didn't." Her tears came again, slow, soundless streaks carving lines down her cheeks. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, and she gave a faint, shaky smile. "But then, he found me." Her gaze drifted toward Detective Harris. "The night it rained, I was scared, and I didn't want to go anywhere. But he and Rex, they came. Anyway, he said I was safe." Her voice broke. "I wanted to believe him." At the witness table, Harris lowered his head, his jaw trembling. His hand went to his mouth, covering the emotion threatening to escape. The little girl looked back at the judge. "You asked if I wanted to say something. I do." Her small shoulders squared, her hands still trembling, but no longer hiding. "I want to say that what you saw in that video is what happened. And it happened more than once. I didn't make it up. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be loved." Her final words cracked, and the courtroom, the place that had spent weeks dissecting her truth, fell completely still. Even the defense attorney's composure fractured. He lowered his eyes. The color drained from his face. The prosecutor blinked rapidly, pretending to look at her notes while her throat tightened. The judge's pen rested motionless on the bench. And Detective Harris, he didn't even try to hide it. A single tear traced down his cheek. Then another. He'd faced killers, chased armed men through dark alleys, but he had never seen bravery like this. A child reclaiming her voice, not with anger, but with truth. Rex stayed beside her, still and steadfast, as though he understood the weight of the moment. He leaned slightly into her hand, his eyes warm and protective. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Then, slowly, the judge exhaled. "Thank you," he said softly, voice barely more than a whisper. "You may sit down." But the girl didn't move right away. She looked around the room one last time, at the faces that had doubted her, at the man who had hurt her, and at the detective who had believed in her. Then she took another shaky breath, wiped her cheeks, and whispered to Rex, "We did it, didn't we?" Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, and for the first time since the trial began, the little girl smiled, faintly, tiredly, but with a light that spoke louder than any verdict could. The gavel struck once, sharp, heavy, final. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a bell tolling over something sacred and broken. No one moved. No one even breathed. The words of the little girl still hung in the air, fragile and trembling, like the last note of a song that refused to fade. Judge Calloway sat still behind the bench. His hands were clasped before him, knuckles white, the lines on his face carved deeper than usual. He had spent 40 years in courtrooms like this one. He had heard confessions, lies, excuses, and pleas. He had watched the guilty walk free and the innocent suffer. Because the law, in its infinite logic, was sometimes blind to humanity. But this was different. He could still see her, the child kneeling beside the dog, her small hand pressed against its fur, her voice trembling yet steady. The courage she carried in her tiny frame put every man in this room to shame. And now the truth was out. The video, the testimony, the fear in her eyes. There was no denying any of it. Still, the law demanded order. The law demanded proof. He took a slow breath, his eyes flicking toward the prosecution table. The attorney sat rigid, her jaw tight with anger barely contained. Across from her, the defense lawyer had his face buried in his hands, whispering furiously to his client, the father, whose expression had curdled into something between disbelief and dread. The girl sat quietly now, her head resting against Rex's shoulder. The dog hadn't moved since she spoke, his calm, protective presence filling the space that no human dared step into. The judge finally spoke, his tone low, grave, steady, the voice of a man who had seen too much, but refused to be unmoved. This court recognizes the significance of what has just been presented, he said. However, proper verification must be conducted before any further rulings can be made. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Frustration, disbelief, relief. The defense clung to that single thread of procedure like a drowning man to driftwood. The video, Calloway continued, will be examined by the forensic unit for authentication. Until that is complete, the session will be temporarily suspended. He hesitated, his gaze falling briefly on the little girl. The witness will remain under police protection until proceedings resume. He struck the gavel again. Court is adjourned. The room exploded into noise, reporters whispering, chairs scraping, voices overlapping. The sudden rush of movement made the child flinch. Detective Harris was on his feet instantly. "Let's go," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. He extended his hand to the girl. She hesitated only a moment before slipping her tiny fingers into his. Rex rose beside them, his tall frame blocking the flashing lights of cameras that had begun to pop near the back of the room. Outside the courtroom doors, chaos waited. The hallway was a sea of microphones and flashing bulbs. "Detective! Detective Harris!" one reporter shouted. "Is it true the K9 found the missing phone? Was the video tampered with? Is the child under witness protection?" Harris didn't answer a single question. He pulled his jacket over the girl's head to shield her from the lights. Rex walked on the other side of her, pressing close enough that she was surrounded by the warmth of fur and fabric, a small fortress against the noise. The cameras followed them all the way to the elevators, voices echoing off marble walls, desperate for a headline. The little girl clung tighter to Harris's hand. "Why are they yelling?" she asked softly. "They just want a story," he said gently. "But you've already told the only one that matters." Rex let out a low huff, his eyes scanning the crowd as the elevator doors finally closed behind them. The chaos was cut off instantly, silence falling like a blessing. The girl exhaled shakily. "Are we going home now?" "Soon," Harris said, crouching to her level. "We're taking you somewhere safe first." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Rex pressed his nose to her palm, and she managed a faint smile. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Harris guided her through the lobby and out to the police vehicle waiting at the curb. The sky outside was beginning to dim, evening light spilling gold across the courthouse steps. The air smelled of rain again, the same scent that always seemed to follow them. He helped her into the car and closed the door gently before turning to Rex. The dog sat beside him, gaze steady, posture alert. "You did good in there," Harris murmured, scratching behind his ear. "Better than any of us." Rex gave a quiet, pleased rumble, his tail thumping once against the pavement. Across the street, reporters still crowded near the steps, their voices a distant hum now. Harris took one last look at the courthouse, the building that promised justice but often took too long to deliver it. And then he climbed into the driver's seat. Inside, the girl was already leaning against Rex, her eyes half closed. Exhaustion had finally caught her. "Sleep if you can," he said softly. "We'll handle the rest." She nodded, curling closer to the dog's warm side. As they drove away, Harris glanced once in the rearview mirror. The courthouse towered against the darkening sky, cold and imposing. But tonight, it looked smaller somehow. Because somewhere inside, an old man was watching the truth with his own eyes. In his chambers, Judge Calloway sat alone. The courtroom was empty now, the echoes of the day still ringing in his ears. He had asked the bailiff to leave the evidence file with him. Now the cracked phone sat on his desk beside a cup of untouched coffee, its screen glowing faintly as the video played again. He watched the images in silence, the cluttered living room, the shouting, the small figure flinching away. He had seen worse evidence in his years on the bench, photographs, recordings, horrors that made even hardened officers look away. But this felt different. Because this wasn't just a case. It was a life. A child's life. When the video ended, he sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen frame. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen. Weary eyes, a face lined by decades of decisions. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The law was clear. Evidence must be verified. Chain of custody must be established. Procedure above emotion. That was what he had taught himself to believe. But as the silence of the room pressed in around him, he realized something that shook him more than any ruling ever had. The law was a compass. But justice was a heartbeat. He reached out and tapped the phone screen once more. The recording replayed. And this time, when the child's cry filled the air, he didn't look away. A single tear slid down the old judge's cheek. He wiped it quickly, though no one was there to see. "Even justice," he whispered, voice hoarse and low, "needs a heart." Outside his window, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. 3 weeks later, the courthouse stood beneath a gray sky. The morning air was cold, sharp, the kind that bit through coats and lingered in the bones. But inside the building, the air was hotter, thick with nerves, whispers, and the electricity of expectation. People filled every row. Reporters leaned forward with pens ready. The jury had returned, solemn and composed, their faces unreadable. Even the marble pillars seemed to stand straighter, as if aware that this was no ordinary hearing. The little girl sat quietly in the front row beside a social worker, clutching her teddy bear. Her hair was neater now, her cheeks no longer pale, but the nervous habit of twisting her fingers remained. Beside her, Rex lay calmly, his head resting between his paws, eyes half open yet alert to every sound. And at the far table, Detective Harris sat in his formal uniform, crisp, dark, the medals on his chest catching the faint light. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the bench where Judge Calloway would soon appear. The bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the murmur. "All rise." The room stood as the judge entered. He looked older somehow, more worn, yet his eyes were steady, filled with something resolute. He settled into his seat, adjusted his papers, and looked across the room. "You may be seated." The scraping of chairs filled the chamber, followed by the hush of hundreds of breaths drawn and held. This court has reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and forensic reports regarding case number 4817, the State versus Daniel W. Parker. The judge's tone was even, formal, but beneath the practiced cadence lay a quiet gravity. "We will now hear the final statements before rendering a verdict." The prosecutor stood, a folder in her hands, her voice measured but heavy with conviction. "Your Honor," she began, "in the past weeks, our team has verified the authenticity of the video retrieved by Detective Harris's K-9 unit. The metadata confirms the recording's original timestamps, unaltered. The location matches the defendant's residence. The footage is unedited. It is, in every sense, the truth." A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. "Time to 100 motions." The defense lawyer's pen stilled in his hand. The prosecutor continued, her tone softening. "The evidence, coupled with the child's consistent testimony, establishes beyond doubt a pattern of neglect and abuse. No further speculation can obscure that reality. The law demands accountability, but the heart of this case, a 7-year-old girl who found courage in the face of fear, demands something greater: acknowledgement." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the child, and her voice trembled just enough to sound human. "She is why we are here." The judge nodded once, then turned to the defense. "Counsel." The defense lawyer stood, his face pale, his voice subdued. "Your Honor, while the evidence is significant, I must emphasize the chain of custody remains questionable. A dog." A low murmur rose through the audience, quickly silenced by a glare from the bailiff. The lawyer hesitated, sweat collecting at his temple. "A police dog discovered the device in a manner outside standard procedure. We cannot—" Judge Calloway lifted a hand. "I'll decide what the court can or cannot consider, Counselor. Sit down." The lawyer obeyed, sinking into his chair, defeated. The judge turned to the prosecution table. "Detective Harris, please approach." Harris stood, his boots echoing softly as he made his way to the stand. He placed one hand on the Bible, took the oath, and sat. His posture was straight, his voice calm. "Detective," the judge began, "describe for the court how the missing evidence was recovered." Harris nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." He took a breath. "During the proceedings, my K-9 partner, Rex, detected a scent near the evidence table. Despite being under command to stay, he advanced, which, at the time, appeared to be an interruption. However, his reaction was deliberate, instinctual." He paused, glancing toward Rex, who was still lying near the girl. The dog's ears perked slightly, as if listening to every word. "Rex located the phone," Harris continued, "under a stack of files. It had been overlooked or misplaced during prior evidence handling. Once recovered, I immediately notified the court. The device was then authenticated by our technical team." The judge leaned forward. "Detective, in your professional experience, could that discovery be attributed purely to training?" Harris hesitated. "Partly, yes. Rex is trained to locate items with human scent, especially objects tied to distress signals or conflict." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "But with respect, Your Honor, I've worked with this dog for 6 years, and I've learned something. Sometimes, it's not just training, it's compassion. He senses things people miss: Fear, pain, truth. That's not something we can program. That's something we can only witness. A murmur of emotion swept the courtroom. Reporters scribbling, jurors glancing at one another. Even the judge's stern expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Detective," Calloway said. "You may step down." Harris nodded and returned to his seat. As he sat, Rex lifted his head briefly, meeting his handler's eyes. A silent exchange of understanding between two souls who had walked through the dark together. The judge reviewed his notes, his voice steady once more. "Before this court renders judgment, I remind all present that justice is not vengeance. It is truth upheld by reason." He took off his glasses and set them aside. But truth, in this case, is no longer hidden. It was found, not by anger nor by chance, but by loyalty and courage. A pause. Then the final words. "This court finds the defendant, Daniel W. Parker, guilty on all counts of child neglect and abuse." The gavel struck. Once. Twice. The sound thundered through the chamber like a breaking dam. For a moment, silence followed. A stunned, heavy silence. And then the room erupted. Reporters whispered in disbelief. The prosecutor exhaled sharply, tears glinting in her eyes. The social worker wrapped an arm around the girl, who stared blankly ahead, trying to understand what guilty meant. Then she turned to Rex. He stood now, tail gently wagging, golden eyes soft and knowing. She dropped her teddy bear and threw her small arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. Detective Harris pressed a hand against his mouth, his eyes closing. The weight he'd carried since the night of the storm, the weight of a promise nearly broken, lifted just enough to let him breathe again. Across the room, the defendant slumped in his chair, pale and silent. The mother covered her face, her sobs muffled by the noise of the crowd. And in the center of it all, the child, the one whose voice had once been swallowed by fear, clung to the dog who had found her truth, who had given it shape, sound, and strength. Harris opened his eyes, watching them, and a single thought whispered through him like a prayer. We kept the promise. The gavel struck one final time. Court dismissed. The noise swelled again, reporters shouting, people rising, flashes from cameras bursting like lightning. But none of it touched the quiet at the heart of that moment. The child, the dog, the man who had refused to give up on either. Harris leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening, chest heaving. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to exhale. Long, slow, and full of release. Justice had spoken, and this time, it had a heart. The courthouse doors opened with a heavy groan, revealing a world washed clean by sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp autumn breeze on the stone steps. Detective Harris stepped out first, followed by the little girl clutching her teddy bear, and Rex, tall and calm, his coat glowing gold in the light. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Detective Harris, how did the dog find the phone? Is the girl under protection? Harris raised a hand. No questions. His quiet authority parted the crowd. He crouched beside the girl. You okay? She nodded faintly. They believed me. They did, he said. Because you were brave. She shook her head. Not me. Rex. Rex sat beside her, steady and silent. The girl hugged his neck, whispering, You made them listen. For a moment, the chaos faded. Just the child, the dog, and the quiet truth between them. Harris's voice softened. He doesn't need thanks. He just follows truth and love. The girl looked up. Then truth must love him back. Harris smiled. Yeah, I think it does. The social worker approached. We can take her now. The placement family's ready. The girl hesitated. Will I see you again? Maybe not soon, Harris said. But Rex and I will be nearby, that's what we do. You promise? He never breaks a promise. She pressed her forehead against Rex's, whispering, Goodbye, hero. Then she turned toward the waiting car. Harris watched as she climbed in, her small hand holding the teddy bear. Through the window, she smiled. Her first real smile in months. Rex's ears flicked as the car drove away. Harris rested a hand on his neck. We did what we could, partner. The city sounds slowly returned. Cars, voices, wind stirring fallen leaves. You spoke when she couldn't, Harris murmured. Guess that's what makes you different. Rex met his gaze, eyes bright with quiet knowing. They stood together on the courthouse steps, one man bound by duty, one creature by heart, both marked by what they'd done. Behind them, a camera clicked. The light caught Rex's fur, turning it to gold. As the crowd thinned and the doors closed, Rex remained, steadfast, proud, watching the horizon. A beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, resting on him like a benediction. There he sat, the silent guardian who gave a child her voice, and reminded a courtroom what justice truly means. In the end, what stays with us isn't just the verdict or the headlines. It's the quiet reminder that love and loyalty can speak louder than words. A German shepherd like Rex doesn't just follow commands, he follows his heart. And sometimes, that's what saves us. The bond between human and animal, that silent understanding that says, you're not alone. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that same unspoken promise, maybe this is the right moment to deepen that connection. There are wonderful places online that share ways to train with compassion, to listen more closely, and to truly see the heart beating beside you. You might want to take a look when you're ready. It's something I found comforting myself. Because at the end of the day, the best kind of justice and the best kind of love both begin in the same place, with kindness.